6 months had passed since the day that changed everything. Ambassador Daniel Carter had stood before the Galactic Council, surrounded by aliens who had ruled the stars for 10,000 years, and delivered humanity's answer to their tribute demand with a single word. No, the galaxy had not forgotten. How could it? In all the long history of the Council, no species had ever refused. Younger races paid their tribute, followed the rules, and kept their heads down. That was how things worked. That was how things had always worked. Until the humans came along, Daniel sat in his office on Earth, reading the latest reports from across the galaxy. News of humanity's defiance had spread to every corner of known space. Some species laughed at the foolish newcomers who thought they could challenge the old order. Others watched with quiet interest, wondering what would happen next. A few, just a few, had begun to ask dangerous questions. His assistant, a young woman named Katie Morgan, knocked on his door. She looked worried, which was becoming her normal expression these days. "The Council has made their move," she said. "Intelligence reports confirm it. They're assembling an enforcement fleet." Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected this. The Council could not let humanity's refusal stand. If one species could say no and get away with it, others might start getting ideas. The whole system depended on everyone believing that resistance was impossible. "How many ships?" he asked. "Almost 100. Maybe more. They're pulling vessels from 12 different member species." Daniel stood up and walked to his window. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It was beautiful. He wondered how many more sunsets he would get to see. "Call a meeting of the Defense Council," he said. "It's time to prepare." 3 days later, Admiral Patricia Dawson stood on the bridge of the battleship Endurance, the flagship of Earth's small but growing fleet. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many battles. She had fought in the resource wars on Earth before first contact. Now she was preparing to fight a war among the stars. Her executive officer, Commander Kevin Brooks, handed her a tablet with the latest fleet positions. "The Council forces are gathering at the edge of the Orion sector. At their current rate, they'll reach our borders in 3 weeks. Patricia studied the data carefully. 97 ships confirmed, with more possibly on the way. Earth had 42 combat vessels and a handful of support ships. The numbers were not in their favor. "They think this will be easy," she said. "They think we'll see their fleet and surrender." Kevin shrugged. "Would that be such a bad thing? Maybe we could negotiate. Pay some of the tribute, keep our independence. Find a middle ground." Patricia shook her head. "There is no middle ground with the Council. They want complete submission. They want us to kneel and stay kneeling forever. And once we do that, we're done. We'll be just like every other species they've conquered, paying taxes to fill their coffers, following rules we had no part in making, asking permission to live our own lives." She turned to face him directly. "My grandfather fought in the Second World War. He told me stories about what happened when people tried to negotiate with tyrants. It never worked. The only thing tyrants understand is strength." On the other side of Earth, President Samuel Griffin was holding a press conference. The whole world was watching as he addressed the cameras with a calm, steady voice. "My fellow citizens, by now you have all heard that the Galactic Council is sending a fleet to our solar system. They are coming because we refuse to pay tribute. They are coming because we refuse to bow." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Some have asked why we did this. Why didn't we just pay the tribute? Why didn't we avoid this confrontation? The answer is simple. Because the tribute was just the beginning. If we had paid, they would have demanded more. They would have placed restrictions on our technology, our trade, our freedom to explore the stars. Piece by piece, they would have taken everything that makes us who we are." He looked directly into the camera, his eyes filled with determination. "We did not come this far as a species by surrendering to those who threatened us. We did not survive ice ages, plagues, and world wars by giving up when things got hard, and we will not start now." Across the planet, people watched and listened. Some were afraid. Some were angry. But something else was growing too. Something that had been sleeping in the human heart for a long time. Pride, defiance, the stubborn refusal to accept a fate that someone else had chosen for them in a small town in Kansas. A retired farmer named George Palmer sat in his living room with his grandson, watching the president's speech. The boy, only 12 years old, looked up at his grandfather with worried eyes. "Are we going to be okay, Grandpa?" George thought about the question for a long moment. He thought about his own grandfather who had stormed the beaches of Normandy. He thought about his father, who had served in Korea. He thought about his own service in a distant desert war half a lifetime ago. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know this. Whatever happens, we're going to face it, standing up. That's what humans do." Back in space, aboard a Valorian trading vessel, a merchant named Korveth was watching a recording of the president's speech. His species had been part of the council for 3,000 years. They had paid tribute for so long that most Valorians couldn't imagine any other way of life. But as he watched the human leaders speak, something stirred inside him. He remembered old stories passed down from generation to generation. Stories of a time before the council, when the Valorians had been free. When they had charted their own course among the stars, those days were long gone. His people had forgotten how to fight. They had forgotten how to say no, but the humans hadn't. Korveth saved the recording and filed it away carefully. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because, for the first time in his long life, he had seen something he thought was impossible. He had seen a species that wasn't afraid. The countdown to war had begun. In 3 weeks, the Council's fleet would arrive. In 3 weeks, humanity would either prove that they could back up their defiance with force, or they would be crushed like every species before them. Admiral Dawson gathered her captains for a final briefing. "They have us outnumbered," she told them. "They have better technology, more experience, and the resources of half the galaxy behind them. On paper, we should lose." She smiled grimly. "Good thing we've never been very good at reading the paper. We're going to show them what happens when you back humans into a corner. We're going to teach them that the word no has consequences." The officers nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew the odds. They knew many of them might not survive. But they also knew why they were fighting. Freedom. It was a simple word. But humans had been fighting for it since the beginning of their history. And they weren't about to stop now. The Council's enforcement fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system on a cold Tuesday morning. 97 vessels of various sizes and shapes hung in the darkness of space like a swarm of angry insects. They had come from a dozen different worlds, representing the military might of civilizations that had ruled the stars since before humans had learned to make fire. "Hi," Admiral Zethaner stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Corvani dreadnought, Eternal Dominion. He was an imposing figure, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shimmered blue and gold in the dim light. His species had been warriors for 50,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had never lost a war. He looked at the tactical display showing the human defense positions. 42 ships, most of them smaller than his escort frigates. Orbital platforms around Earth and Mars. A few scattered outposts on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. It was pathetic. It was barely worth his time. "Open a channel to the humans," he commanded. "All frequencies." His communications officer obeyed, and soon Zethaner's voice echoed across the solar system. "People of Earth, your defiance has been noted. You have one final opportunity to submit your tribute and acknowledge the Council's authority. Failure to comply will result in the pacification of your homeworld. You have 1 hour to respond." He ended the transmission and settled back in his command chair, confident that the humans would see reason. No species had ever chosen destruction over submission. It simply wasn't logical. Aboard Luna Base, Admiral Patricia Dawson listened to the ultimatum with a calm expression. Around her, officers moved efficiently at their stations, preparing for what was about to come. They had trained for this moment. They were as ready as they would ever be. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Amy Peters, her communications officer, "the enemy fleet is holding position. They're waiting for our response." Patricia nodded. "Open a channel." Same frequencies they used. She stood up straight, smoothed her uniform, and looked directly at the camera that would broadcast her image across space. "Hi, Admiral Zethaner. This is Admiral Patricia Dawson of the United Earth Defense Force. I have been authorized to deliver humanity's response to your ultimatum." She paused for just a moment, letting the silence carry across the void. "Our answer remains unchanged. No, if you want our tribute, come and take it. If you can..." She cut the channel and turned to her officers. "Battle stations. All ships engage on my command." The first shots were fired 17 minutes later. The Corvani expected a quick victory. Their ships were larger, their weapons more powerful, their shields more advanced. They had fought wars across the galaxy for millennia. The humans were newcomers, barely out of their home system, still learning how to survive in the cold darkness between stars. What the Corvani did not expect was how the humans would fight. Admiral Dawson had studied every piece of intelligence she could find about Council military tactics. She knew their strengths and their weaknesses. She knew they relied on overwhelming force, on intimidation, not on enemies who would break and run when faced with superior numbers. She knew they had not fought a real war in centuries, so she gave them something they weren't prepared for: the endurance. Led a squadron of heavy cruisers straight into the heart of the enemy formation. It was a suicide charge, or it would have been if the humans had been trying to survive. But survival wasn't the point. The point was to get close enough to hurt them. "All ships, fire everything," Patricia ordered. "Don't hold anything back." Human missiles streaked through space, hundreds of them, each one carrying a nuclear warhead. They flew in patterns that the Corvani computers struggled to track, weaving and dancing and splitting into smaller projectiles at the last moment. Some were shot down. Many were shot down. But not all of them. The first Corvani cruiser died in a flash of atomic fire. Then another. Then another. "Hi, Admiral," Zethaner stared at his display in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to scatter. They were supposed to run. That was what inferior species did when faced with real power. "Titan formation," he ordered. "Concentrate fire on their lead ships." But while he was focusing on the Endurance and her escorts, a dozen human stealth frigates had circled around behind his fleet. They were small ships, almost invisible to sensors, designed for exactly this kind of mission. Their captain, a young officer named Chris Taylor, had been waiting for this moment his entire career. "We're in position," he reported to Admiral Dawson. "Ready to engage?" "At their supply ships," she responded. "Take out their fuel reserves." The stealth frigates struck without warning, merging from the darkness to deliver devastating attacks on the vulnerable support vessels at the rear of the Council formation. 4 supply ships were destroyed in the first minute, 2 more in the second. By the time the Corvani escorts could respond, the damage was done. The battle raged for 4 hours. It was chaos and fire and death played out against the cold backdrop of space. Human ships were destroyed, their crews scattered to the void. But for every human vessel that fell, 2 or 3 Council ships died with it. Commander Kevin Brooks stood beside Admiral Dawson, watching the tactical display update in real time. He had lost count of how many friends had died in the last few hours. But he could also see something he had barely dared to hope for. "Their formation is breaking," he said quietly. "They're not used to this." Patricia nodded. Her face was grim, her eyes tired. But there was something else there too. Something like hope. "They're used to species that surrender," she said. "They've forgotten what it's like to fight someone who won't." She turned to her weapons officer. "Target the enemy flagship. Let's remind them. Eternal Dominion was a massive ship, the pride of the Corvani fleet. Its shields were the strongest in the galaxy, its weapons the most powerful. But it had never been tested in real combat. Its crew had never faced an enemy who wasn't already defeated before the battle began. Human missiles swarmed around it, overwhelming its point defenses. Energy weapons from a dozen ships hammered at its shields. Slowly, impossibly, the shields began to fail. High Admiral Zethaner watched in horror as his bridge shook from impact after impact. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. Signal the fleet, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Retreat. All ships retreat to the outer system. Council fleet scattered, limping away from the battlefield they had expected to dominate. Behind them, they left 43 destroyed ships and thousands of dead. The humans had lost 18 vessels. It was a terrible price. But it was a price they had been willing to pay. Admiral Dawson sat down heavily in her command chair. Around her, officers were celebrating, hugging each other, crying with relief. They had done the impossible. They had stood against the might of the galaxy and survived. But she knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Give me a count of our losses, she said quietly. And start preparing for their next attack. They'll be back. And next time, they'll bring more ships. She looked out at the stars, at the debris field that marked where so many brave men and women had died. But at least now they know. Now the whole galaxy knows. Humanity doesn't surrender. Not today. Not ever. News traveled faster than light in the galaxy. Within hours of the battle's end, every major world knew what had happened. The humans had fought the Council's enforcement fleet. The humans had won. On the trading world of Nexus Prime, a Valorian merchant named Corveth sat in a crowded bar, watching the footage on a holographic display above the counter. The place was packed with beings from a dozen different species. All staring in disbelief at the images playing before them, they saw human ships. Charging into formations that should have destroyed them. They saw the Corvani flagship burning, its mighty hull torn open by weapons that should have been too primitive to matter. They saw the Council fleet running away, leaving their dead behind. They actually fought back, someone said. A Drethkai trader, his voice filled with wonder. Nobody fights the Council. Nobody used to, Corveth replied quietly. He thought of his own homeworld. Valoria had been part of the Council for 3,000 years. His people paid tribute every cycle, just like everyone else. They followed the rules. They kept their heads down. They had forgotten any other way of living. Corveth remembered his grandfather telling him stories when he was young. Stories of the old days, before the Council came. When Valorians had been explorers and pioneers, charting new worlds and building their own destiny, those days had ended long before Corveth was born. His people had become merchants and traders, buying and selling goods across the galaxy, paying their tribute, and trying not to attract attention. But as he watched the human ships fight and die and win, something stirred in his chest. Something he didn't have a name for. Something that felt like waking up after a very long sleep. They're going to be destroyed, said the Drethkai trader. The Council will send a bigger fleet. They'll crush them, maybe Corveth said. Or maybe not. In the Council chambers on Central Station, the mood was very different. The surviving admirals of the enforcement fleet stood before the full assembly, trying to explain how they had lost to a species that had only discovered faster than light travel 40 years ago. Sovereign Maul, the Speaker of the Council, towered over them from his elevated platform. He was a Drethkai, one of the founding species of the Council. His family had held the Speaker's position for 6 generations. He had never experienced failure in his long life. He did not handle it well. How did this happen? He demanded. The humans are primitives. Their technology is generations behind our own. Explain this to me. High Admiral Zethaner, who had barely survived the battle, spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. Our analysts underestimated their tactical abilities. Their weapons are crude, yes, but effective. They use nuclear warheads, which most species abandoned centuries ago. The radiation plays havoc with our shield harmonics. Then adapt your shields, Sovereign Maul snapped. We will. But there is something else. Sethanor hesitated, as if afraid to continue. They're soldiers. They're crews. They do not retreat. Even when retreat would be the logical choice, even when survival is impossible, they keep fighting until the very end. The chamber fell silent. This was something the Council had not encountered in a very long time. Species that joined the Council did so because fighting was hopeless. They surrendered because surrendering made sense. What kind of beings kept fighting when there was no hope of winning? Ambassador Yilsha of the Corvani Dominion spoke up. We should send a larger fleet. Overwhelming force. Destroy their homeworld completely. Make an example that the galaxy will remember for 10,000 years. Sovereign Maul nodded slowly. Begin assembling the Grand Fleet. Every available ship from every member species. We will end this rebellion once and for all. But even as he gave the order, reports were flooding in from across Council space. On the Valorian colony of New Haven, workers had staged a protest against the latest tribute increase. On the Drethkai mining world of Corinth, someone had painted human symbols on the walls of the Colonial Administration building. On a dozen other worlds, beings were watching the footage from the battle and asking questions they had never asked before. If the humans could say no, why couldn't they? Back on Earth, the celebrations were muted by grief. Nearly 2,000 soldiers had died in the battle. 2,000 men and women who had known they might not come home but had fought anyway. Their names scrolled across screens in every city, every town, every home on the planet. President Samuel Griffin addressed the nation from the White House. Today, we mourn our fallen heroes. They gave their lives so that we might remain free. They faced impossible odds, and they did not flinch. Because of them, humanity still stands. He paused, his voice heavy with emotion. But we must not forget that this war is not over. The Council will return. They will come with more ships, more weapons, more determination to crush us. We must be ready. Every man, every woman, every child who can contribute must do their part. This is the fight of our lives. This is the fight for everything we are and everything we hope to be. Across the planet, people listened. Factories increased their production. Shipyards worked around the clock. Young men and women lined up at recruiting stations, ready to join the fleet. Fear was there, yes. But something stronger was growing alongside it. Unity, purpose. The feeling that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Admiral Patricia Dawson stood in the memorial garden at Luna Base. Surrounded by the families of those who had died, she had attended too many funerals in her life. She had delivered too many folded flags, too many empty words of comfort. But this time felt different. Your loved ones died free, she told them. They died fighting for something worth fighting for. That's more than most beings in this galaxy can say. For thousands of years, species have submitted to the Council because they believed there was no other choice. Your sons and daughters proved them wrong. They showed the galaxy that there is always a choice, and they made theirs. Among the grieving families was a young woman named Laura Webb, her brother. Christopher had been a weapons officer on the cruiser Defiant. The ship had been destroyed when a Corvini beam cut through its reactor core. There had been no survivors. Laura approached the Admiral after the ceremony. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady. "My brother sent me a message before the battle," she said. "He told me he wasn't afraid. He said that even if we lost, it would be worth it. Because at least we tried. At least we showed them who we really are."
Ow.
Patricia put a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to keep trying. I promise you that. We're going to make sure your brother's sacrifice meant something." In his quarters aboard his trading vessel, Corveth made a decision. He had spent his whole life playing it safe, keeping his head down, paying his tribute like a good little Valorian. But something had changed. Watching the humans fight had awakened. Something in him that he thought had died long ago. He opened a secure channel to an old friend. Another merchant who had connections in unexpected places. "I want to help them," he said simply. "The humans, I want to help them win." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's dangerous talk," his friend replied. "The Council doesn't forgive traitors." "I know, but I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of living on my knees." Another pause. "Then, there are others who feel the same way. More than you might think. I'll put you in touch." Corveth ended the call and looked out his viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, a small species on a small planet was fighting for its freedom. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to fight too. The galaxy was watching. And the galaxy was starting to change. The weeks following the first battle were the hardest humanity had ever faced. Factories ran day and night, producing ships and weapons and supplies. Scientists worked without sleep trying to find any advantage that might help in the coming fight. Every resource, every effort, every thought was focused on one goal: survival. Admiral Patricia Dawson spent most of her time in strategy meetings, planning for a battle she wasn't sure they could win. Intelligence reports suggested the Council was assembling the largest fleet in galactic history. 500 ships, maybe more. Humanity had rebuilt their forces to 60 vessels, plus another 20 under construction. The math was simple and terrifying. Commander Kevin Brooks found her one evening in her office on Luna Base, staring at star charts that showed the likely approach routes of the Council fleet. "You should get some rest," he said. "You've been awake for 30 hours?" Patricia shook her head. "Every hour I sleep is an hour I could be finding a way to save us. If you collapse from exhaustion, you won't save anyone." Kevin sat down across from her. "Talk to me. What's really bothering you?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What if I made a mistake? What if I led all those people to their deaths for nothing? We won the first battle, but we both know what's coming. The Council isn't going to stop. They can't afford to. If they let us win, their whole system falls apart." Kevin nodded slowly. "That's true. But you didn't make a mistake. You gave us a chance. Before that battle, half the galaxy thought humans would surrender like everyone else. Now they know better. Now they're watching. And some of them are starting to help." Pulled out a tablet and showed her the latest reports. "We've got 3 species sending us supplies through back channels. 2 more are sharing intelligence about Council fleet movements. A Valorian trade convoy is delivering advanced shield components to Mars next week. Officially, they're just doing business. Unofficially, they're taking our side." Patricia looked at the reports with tired eyes. "It's not enough. We need ships. We need soldiers. We need allies who will actually fight beside us." "That might be coming too." Kevin hesitated. "Ambassador Carter has been making progress. He says there's a coalition forming. Species who are tired of the Council, tired of paying tribute, tired of living in fear. They're not ready to openly rebel, not yet. But if we can hold on long enough, if we can show them it's possible to win, some of them might join us on Earth." Ambassador Daniel Carter was working harder than he had ever worked in his life. He had always been good at diplomacy, at finding common ground between people who thought they were enemies. But this was different. This was trying to build a revolution without anyone knowing he was doing it. He met with representatives from a dozen different species. Always in secret, always through intermediaries. The conversations were careful, coded, full of hidden meanings. No one wanted to be caught plotting against the Council. "We admire what you've done," said a Valorian diplomat during one late-night meeting. "But you have to understand our position. If we openly support you and you lose, our entire species will be punished. The Council doesn't forgive rebellion." "I understand," Daniel said. "I'm not asking you to fight. Not yet. I'm just asking you to be ready. When the time comes when we've proven that the Council can be beaten, I want you to remember this conversation." The diplomat was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There are others who feel as I do. More than you might think. The Council has ruled through fear for 10,000 years. But fear only works as long as people believe there's no alternative. You've given us an alternative. That's worth more than you know." Meanwhile, across human space, ordinary people were doing extraordinary things. In a small town in Nebraska, a retired engineer named Helen Price came out of retirement to help design a new type of missile guidance system. On the moon, a team of construction workers broke every safety record to complete a new orbital defense platform in half the expected time. On Mars, colonists who had never fired a weapon in their lives signed up for military training. Everyone knew what was at stake. Everyone knew the Council was coming. And everyone wanted to do their part, Laura Webb. The young woman whose brother had died in the first battle joined the fleet as a communications officer. Her friends told her she was crazy. Her mother begged her to stay safe. But Laura had made up her mind. "Christopher died fighting for something he believed in," she told her mother. "I need to do the same. I need to finish what he started." She was assigned to a new cruiser called the Horizon, which was being prepared as the fleet's new flagship. The ship was bigger than the Endurance, with more weapons, stronger shields, and the most advanced technology humanity could produce. It would carry Admiral Dawson into the final battle. Laura met the Admiral during her first week aboard. She was nervous, but Patricia put her at ease with a warm smile. "I remember your brother," Patricia said. "He was a good officer, brave, dedicated. You should be proud of him." "I am," Laura said. "That's why I'm here. I want to make sure his sacrifice meant something." Patricia nodded. "It will. I promise you that." As the weeks passed, the coalition that Daniel Carter had been building began to take shape. It was still small, still secret, but it was real. Representatives from 20 different species had pledged to support humanity if the tide of war turned in their favor. They couldn't send ships or soldiers. Not yet. But they could send supplies, share intelligence, prepare their own people for the possibility of freedom. Corvette. The Valorian merchant had become one of Daniel's most valuable contacts. He had connections throughout the galaxy, relationships built over decades of trading. He used those connections to smuggle weapons components past Council checkpoints, to pass messages between rebel sympathizers, to gather information about Council fleet movements. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel asked him during one of their secure conversations. "You could be executed if the Council finds out." Corvette was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When I was young, my grandfather told me stories about the old days. Before the Council, when my people were free, I always thought those were just fairy tales, dreams of a past that never really existed. But then I watched your people fight. I watched them stand up and say no, and I realized those stories were true. We used to be free. We can be free again." The final preparations were almost complete. The Council's Grand Fleet was gathering at a staging point 3 light years from Earth. 500 ships. The largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Against them, humanity had 78 vessels, plus another 30 from species who had secretly agreed to join the fight. When the time came, Admiral Dawson gathered her senior officers for a final briefing. The mood was serious, but determined. "We all know what we're facing," she said. "The numbers aren't in our favor. They never have been. But we've proven once that numbers don't tell the whole story. We've proven that courage and determination can overcome superior firepower." She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "Some of us won't survive the coming battle. I won't pretend otherwise. But if we win, if we can hold on long enough, if we can break their will to fight, then we change everything. Not just for humanity. For the entire galaxy, every species that's been living under the Council's boot for thousands of years will see that freedom is possible, and that's worth fighting for. That's worth dying for." Commander Kevin Brooks spoke up. "When do we expect them to arrive?" "Intelligence suggests 3 weeks," Patricia replied. "Maybe less. We use every minute we have to prepare. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. We leave nothing in reserve." She stood up, signaling the end of the briefing. "Get some rest while you can. When the fighting starts, we won't have time to sleep." As her officers filed out, Patricia stood alone in the empty conference room. She looked out the viewport at the stars, at the vast darkness that would soon be filled with fire and death. "We're ready," she whispered to herself. "Whatever happens, we're ready." The Council's Grand Fleet arrived on a morning that no one on Earth would ever forget. 500 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, their sensors sweeping across human space like the eyes of a hungry predator. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, and it had come for one purpose: to crush humanity's rebellion and restore the Council's authority. High Marshal Draventor stood on the bridge of his command ship, the Sovereign Will. He was a legend among Council military officers. A soldier who had fought in more campaigns than most species, had years of history. He had never lost a battle. He did not intend to start now. "Report," he commanded. His tactical officer studied the displays. "The humans have gathered their fleet in high orbit above Mars. 78 vessels, plus an additional 30 of unknown origin. The unknown ships appear to be from non-council species. Draven Tor frowned. So the humans had found allies. Interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. They were still outnumbered almost 5-1. The outcome was not in doubt. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Standard attack formation. We end this today." Aboard the Horizon, Admiral Patricia Dawson watched the Council fleet approach on her tactical display. It was even bigger than she had expected. Even knowing what was coming, seeing it with her own eyes was something else entirely. Commander Kevin Brooks stood beside her. "They're moving into attack formation. I see it." Patricia's voice was calm. She had made her peace with what was coming. Now all that remained was to fight. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. Human ships and allied vessels alike heard her voice in their speakers. "This is Admiral Dawson. You all know what we're facing. You all know the odds. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending this will be easy. It won't be. Many of us won't survive the next few hours." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I want you to remember something. Remember why we're here. Remember what we're fighting for. The Council has ruled this galaxy through fear for 10,000 years. They believe that freedom is a privilege they can give or take away. They believe that the strong have the right to crush the weak. They believe that beings like us, beings who dare to say no, are nothing but a nuisance to be swept aside." Her voice grew stronger. "Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show them that freedom isn't a privilege. It's a right. It belongs to everyone who has the courage to claim it. Today, we fight for every species that has ever dreamed of throwing off the Council's chains. Today, we fight for the future." She took a deep breath. "All ships, engage on my command." The battle began. The first hour was chaos. Human missiles streaked through space, nuclear fire blooming against Council shields. Energy beams carved through the darkness, turning ships into burning wreckage. The vastness of space was filled with explosions, debris, and death. Admiral Dawson commanded from the bridge of the Horizon, directing her forces with the calm precision of a master strategist. She had studied every battle the Council had ever fought. She knew their tactics, their weaknesses, their assumptions. And she used that knowledge to keep her fleet alive. 3rd Squadron, break left and target their supply line. 7th Squadron, hold position and draw fire. I need the stealth frigates to circle behind their flagship. Laura Webb worked at her communications station, relaying orders, coordinating movements, keeping the fleet connected in the midst of the storm. She thought of her brother, who had died in a battle just like this one. She wondered if he had been afraid at the end. She wondered if she would be. But there was no time for fear. There was only the work, only the fight. High Marshal Draven Tor watched the battle unfold with growing frustration. The humans were fighting better than he had expected. They used their smaller ships to maximum effect, striking and retreating, never staying in one place long enough to be destroyed. Their allies from the non-council species were fighting with equal determination. "Concentrate fire on their flagship," he ordered. "Once their admiral falls, their fleet will break." But the Horizon refused to die. Its shields absorbed punishment that should have destroyed it twice over. Its weapons struck back with deadly accuracy, crippling a Corvani cruiser, destroying a Drethkai destroyer. Then something unexpected happened. A voice crackled across all frequencies. "Not human. Not Corvani Valorian. This is Captain Corveth of the Valorian Trading Fleet. I am hereby withdrawing from Council service. Any vessel that wishes to join me in supporting the human cause is welcome." Patricia stared at her tactical display as 17 Valorian ships broke formation and turned their weapons on the Council fleet. For a moment, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then it happened again, and again. Ships from 3 other species, vessels that had come with the Council fleet, switched sides. They attacked their former allies with a fury that spoke of generations of resentment, finally finding release in the space of 10 minutes. Draven Tor's fleet lost 40 ships, not to human weapons, but to his own forces turning against him. "It's impossible," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This cannot be happening." But it was. The Grand Fleet was fracturing before his eyes. Species that had served the Council for millennia were finally saying no. They had seen the humans fight. They had seen that victory was possible, and they had decided that they would rather die free than live as subjects any longer. "Signal the fleet," Draven Tor said, his voice hollow with defeat. "General retreat. All ships. Fall back to Council space." The Council fleet scattered, fleeing in all directions, pursued by human ships and their new allies. What had been the greatest military force in galactic history became a broken, running mob. On the bridge of the horizon, officers were cheering, embracing, crying with relief. They had done the impossible. They had won. Kevin Brooks turned to Admiral Dawson. His eyes were wet with tears. "We did it." "We actually did it," Patricia nodded slowly. She felt numb. She had spent so long preparing for defeat that she didn't quite know how to process victory. She said finally, "We started something. The real work begins now." She looked out at the battlefield, at the debris and the wreckage and the fires slowly dying in the cold of space. "We showed them it could be done. Now we have to help them finish it." The days that followed, everything changed. Species that had paid tribute to the Council for thousands of years declared their independence. The coalition that Daniel Carter had built in secret became a public alliance, growing larger every day. The Council's authority, once absolute, began to crumble like a castle built on sand. 1 year later, Ambassador Daniel Carter returned to the Galactic Council chambers. This time, he was not alone. Representatives from 47 species stood behind him, all of them former Council subjects who had chosen to join the free systems. Alliance. Sovereign Maul glared down at him from the speaker's podium. "You have brought chaos to the galaxy. Disorder, rebellion." Daniel smiled. "I brought a choice. For the first time in 10,000 years, the beings of this galaxy have a choice. Some will choose to stay with the Council. That's their right. But others have chosen freedom." He turned to address not just the Council, but the countless beings watching across the galaxy. "The humans have a saying, 'Give me liberty or give me death.' We meant it when we said no to your tribute demands. And we'll keep meaning it, no matter how long it takes, no matter what it costs." Corveth stood among the Alliance representatives watching Daniel speak. He thought of his grandfather's stories about the old days, about freedom, about what it meant to chart your own course among the stars. Those stories weren't fairy tales anymore. They were reality. They were the future. Laura Webb watched the broadcast from her station, aboard.